And we are recording. There we go. All right, welcome everybody. Good to see you, all of you folks from Nelson Avenue Church.
Hmm.
Julie and I are glad to be with you tonight and to think with you a little bit about polarities. When we did our consultation work with all of you back in the spring and early summer, one of the things that came up in that conversation was a sense that there are competing values that can be better thought of as friends. And we're going to talk about what that means a little bit tonight and then equip you to have a keen eye for where that shows up elsewhere in the church's life, because there could be multiple polarities that are alive in any given congregation. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as time goes along. Let me offer a word of prayer, and then I'm going to turn it over to Julia to walk us through some opening comments and slides. So let's go to God together, everybody. Father God, we are so grateful to be your children, to be called into relationship with you and into relationship with one another, and to be sent by you into the church and into the broader community to be your salt, the salt and light for the world, agents of your restoring work, your kingdom. We pray with thanks for all of that and pray that tonight, as we meet to think about polarities in particular, that you would equip us, Father, by your presence here, by your Spirit, and by the content that Julia and I will bring to these folks. May it be that your kingdom is built, that your name is made famous, that your will is done, and is carried forward somehow in this conversation, even as it is in heaven. And we pray all of this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, everyone. I am going to share my screen so that you can see a little bit of what we want to lead you through, and I'll turn it over to you, Julia, for you to carry us for a little while here.
Sounds great. Thanks everybody for the chance to join you this evening. And what Dave and I hope to walk through with you is this training about polarity management and the power of the word and. Um, As Dave mentioned earlier, this training arises from recommendations of a report that was given in June, and this training has been delivered to a number of church groups previously, especially in settings where groups, congregations, councils are experiencing division and tension. And our hope is that it can help you move from a posture of or into a posture of and. We can sometimes get stuck thinking that we have to be on one side or the other, or that two opposing things could not coexist. And we want to talk a little bit about how maybe they can, and there might be a healthy way to do that. Here's just a fun image of some cute dogs of what the or looks like. So rather than working together to have an these dogs are pulling apart that it has to be either or. So competing values are often pitted against one another and eventually not just seen as opposites of one another, but as enemies of one another. And the or dynamic deepens. I think a great example of this is something we were just talking about in the election in the US, how became so pitted and there was so much tension because of the or and how we have to be on one side or the other. Some of these scenarios can play out in tradition versus innovation. Another way of naming this is stability and change. That is finding a balance between honoring the past and being relevant to the present situation. So, a tension between the way things have always been and wanting to have a whole new way of doing things. Does it need to be completely one or the other? Another example is strong clergy leadership versus strong lay leadership. Here, the issue is shared leadership instead of competition for power. Thriving congregations need strong pastors, and yet they also need lay leaders who are willing to work together to achieve the mission of the church. So, in this scenario, we might want to focus on strengthening the uniqueness of each role so that both are being done to the best of their abilities rather than needing to have one be strong and the other weak. They can both be strong together. Nurture versus transformation. We might call this loving people as they are and helping them become who God would have them to be. It is a polarity of focusing on pastoral care and discipleship. Inreach versus outreach. This is again an area that easily leads itself to competition. In our congregation, do we focus on meeting the needs of the members, or do we reach out to those beyond the congregation's walls, both in terms of evangelism and social justice? Is the church a chaplaincy or a mission station? Or do we need to make sure that both poles are managed well? We need to attend to the needs of the members, of course, but it's also really important to do outreach in the community and to have more people become part of the family of God. We need to do the outreach, but how do we manage both of those things well? Next is call versus duty. How are we motivated to serve? Is it a call or is it a duty? On one hand, the question is answered by attending to those things that emerge from our basic values. And on the other hand, attending to those things we feel a definite call to engage in. On one hand, there is a sense of making use of one's gifts. On the other hand, recognizing that there are certain things to be done as a Christian. Candor versus diplomacy. This is another way of recognizing the inherent tension with truth and grace. Are we prone to bluntness that can be hurtful, or are we prone toward diplomacy or niceness that is not sufficiently clear about being said? How can we be clear and steadfast, yet also kind and gracious at the same time? In churches, the people who represent competing values come to councils with complaints and demand council action or decision. Councils then mistakenly assume that what they have is a problem to solve. They sense that they have to determine which value and which group of people will win and which will lose. The argument, what a yucky situation to be in. It becomes a battle between a winner and a loser, and that is very, very challenging. And so many councils can feel like the complaint department and just want to tell people to please take a number. The one caveat that I would add to this scenario is that if someone comes forward with an allegation of abuse, we want to be careful that we're not looking at that situation as a side of winning or losing. That needs to be handled differently. But in other situations, it can certainly feel like a complaint department.
Thanks, Julia. I'm going to take the slide off for a second. I just want to double check. Are you guys seeing me or the slides now?
We're seeing all of us on the screen, Dave. The slide is
Terrific. That's what I want. Yep. Yeah, thanks, Julia, for that introduction. As I said a minute ago, I was in Chicago at a church, and two polarities actually came to the surface in that consultation. Julia, it was so interesting. You'd love this story. Here's a congregation where a missional pastor was hired by the church because they wanted to do mission. Missional pastor comes, starts to reorient the church in terms of a more missional kind of posture rather than simply taking care of current ministries, current programs, and so on. And as soon as folks start to experience the changes, they start to object. They start to become really uncomfortable. And what's happening in a situation like that is that you've got the polarity between in-reach and outreach. And one of the polarities that Julia mentioned just a moment ago in her introduction The pastor's coming in with a posture of wanting to focus ministry on outreach. Those inside the church who hired him to do that are, and maybe they're not quite aware of that, but they're focused on inreach, taking care of our own, making sure that we maintain the traditions, being clear about who we are, and taking care of those inside the church family that might have issues, challenges, and problems, whether it's an illness or the death of a family member or what have you. Inreach and outreach. And in this church, at the moment, those two things are perceived to be enemies of one another. And so members who might be in favor of the pastor and his outreach posture are coming to the council and saying, hey, what about the fact that we hired this guy to do that? And there are other folks in the same congregation who are saying, hey, why are we not being well taken care of? My aunt wasn't visited by any of the elders recently when she had an illness. Um, Inreach versus outreach. That's the dynamic in a lot of churches. One of the other polarities at work in this particular congregation that I was working with is tradition versus innovation. The traditions being valued, and at the same time, other people in the congregation wanting to do ministry a little bit differently. And the challenge with counsel then is how do you try to do that both of those two things? Is it possible? So in any case, that's where polarities come in kind of handy. So I'm going to return us to the slides and just make our way through here. Is there a way of honoring both of the competing values, whether they are any one of the values that Julia talked about in her introduction? Is there a way to honor both of the competing values? That's the key question. When I was at work at Nelson Avenue some months ago, a key polarity that I observed, and you may observe as well, is thorough process versus efficient deployment. Let me unpack that for a second. I saw and heard from people who really cherish thorough process, whether it's process related to a safe church policy, or if it's process related to the way that a new ministry gets formed and implemented and sent out to do its work. Thorough process. There are steps that we've agreed to. There are things that we want to make sure to attend to, details that need to be put into place in order for us to guarantee that this ministry is going to serve us well. Thorough process. At the same time, I was hearing from people who wanted efficient deployment, particularly efficient deployment of new members into the volunteer pool. They wanted a sense that there's a clear and fairly efficient pathway from being a visitor at the church to being deployed in ministry at the church. And the value is helping people sense that they belong. We want them to sense that they belong, and one way to do that is to put them into ministry. So we need a way to efficiently deploy them in ministry. Both of these values, thorough process and efficient deployment, both of these values, I think, had support across the church, but a certain group of people really valued this one a little higher, and another group of people valued this one a little higher. Okay? So what if we turn the verses or the or, thorough process or efficient deployment? What if we could turn that into an and? Thorough process and efficient deployment. Or in the case of the church in Chicago that I was working with the last couple of days, tradition and innovation. Tradition and innovation, not tradition or innovation, but tradition and innovation. And inreach and outreach. Is there a way to do both of these things in a way that blesses one another? And in a polarity, there most certainly is. And that's what we want to spend some time talking about here in the next little while. Maybe a question that comes up for you as we're making our way into this conversation is a wonder about what makes these two values, this values combination, into a polarity. Well, both sides of the polarity are important values that, and here's the key, that need one another to flourish, that need one another in order to be truly fruitful. Inreach is not truly fruitful unless it's accompanied by all the upsides that come with doing outreach. And outreach is not truly fruitful in a congregation unless it's accompanied by all the upsides that come with doing inreach. They actually need each other, kind of like breathing in and out and in and out. You have to do both. You can't just breathe in all the time. And you can't just breathe out all the time either. You need both. Another polarity that might come to mind is the one that John, the Apostle John, talks about in the first chapter of his gospel. It's when he's talking about Jesus coming full of two things. Anybody remember what those two things are? Jesus came full of such and this and such. What were those two things?
Grace and truth.
Thanks, Angela. Yes. He came full of grace and truth. Not grace or truth, not just grace, not just truth, but grace and truth. These two things, as it turns out, are very hard to balance, but Jesus did that perfectly, understanding that they actually need one another in order for both of them to be robust. And the same is true in our conversation here at Nelson Avenue in terms of thorough process and efficient deployment. It turns out that these two things need one another in order to be really valuable for the congregation. Tall people and short people is not a polarity. Those things might seem to be opposites, but they're not a polarity because you don't need a short person in order to be tall. And you don't need a tall person in order to be a short person. These two things don't need one another, like truth and grace need one another, or inreach and outreach need one another, or tradition and innovation need one another, or in our conversation, thorough process and efficient deployment actually need one another in order to be of true benefit to the congregation. Here's a pretty picture for you. This is what we're going to call a polarity map, a polarity map. What you see at the top of the map, well, first of all, let me say this. It helps us to see all the different pieces, the values and the fears in one place on a polarity map. To make yourselves a copy, I want to have you grab your slip of paper. Hopefully you've gotten to the meeting with one or two slips of paper and a pen or a pencil or something along that line. And in a moment, I'm going to have you draw out this polarity map. And it's not going to look like this exactly, but I'm going to give you a simpler version to draw. But what I want to point out is that there are four quadrants. There's a top left, a top right, bottom right, and a bottom left. And the top half are the two upsides of each of the things we're trying to balance. The bottom two quadrants are the downsides of these two things that we're trying to balance. And once we've named the polarity, which we've already done, we're going to fill these four quadrants with all of the upsides and downsides of both of these, what once was thought of as opposites, but now we want to think of as partners. So yeah, you've got up in the top left there, positive results of focus on the left pole or one of the values, okay? The top right, positive results of focus on the other value. The bottom right, this is all the negative results of over focus on one of the values. If you do nothing but just one of these things, what are the downsides that are likely to happen, okay? And on the left bottom quadrant, what are the downsides if you focus exclusively on the other value and don't bother with the opposing value or the partnering value? So in general terms, that's what we want to kind of line up. And we're going to do that with the polarity that I've identified for you. But before I jump in and we begin to draw together, let me just pause for a second and see if there's any questions so far. We've been throwing stuff at you for a few minutes here. Let me take a little bit of a break, just see if there's any questions, any wonderings. Does this remind you of anything? Don't be shy. Are some of you recognizing this dynamic from other elements of your life? where there are two things that are being balanced, perhaps at work, perhaps in the home, perhaps at school, but two different values that are mistakenly seen as opposites of one another, but actually can bless the body, the people, the group, by being seen as partners with each other. Or maybe you have examples of some of the polarities that Julia mentioned earlier a moment ago. What do you think?
Well, Dave, I did reference your workshop this past Sunday, the one you did in May. So just this, and we used, it wasn't quite this, but I really appreciated that the width when you were talking about those four quadrants. And so that was the grace and truth, but it makes me think about that, right?
Yeah.
So that was really helpful for me.
Good. Yeah, this is a little, I think, kind of the same conversation, the with conversation, the and the with are different ways of saying kind of the same thing. Yeah, let's hear another couple of comments and then we'll move on with the rest of the presentation. What else is coming to mind, everybody?
If I may say, Sandra here.
Hi, Sandra.
When I look at this and what I was hearing, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, I was thinking like one of the values is understanding, and then on the right, I would say accommodating. So you need to understand in order to accommodate the situation and whatever the case might be.
Hmm. Can you think of an example where that polarity might come to expression, Sandra?
I'm just using that as a generic example. So, for instance, understanding, learning about other cultures, of their background, where they come from, and accommodating is willing to listen and learn.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah. So,
thanks for
like
that. Yeah,
absorbing in the information.
right. Understanding and accommodating. Those might be polarities, or they might be sequences in the same kind of journey of being welcoming and hospitable, understanding someone and then accommodating someone. Um, so I'm not entirely sure that that's an example of a polarity, but those two things seem to be valuable assets in any church's kind of hospitality ministry. They may or may not be a polarity, though. Uh, but anyway,
And
any other thoughts? Yeah. Thought I heard somebody else just about to jump in.
so, if I may say again, last piece is like when I was talking about this, I am talking about not just someone with unique needs. For instance, someone that may have a disability that often can be hindering in their daily lives. I'm using that as an example, and sometimes there are questions that people want to ask, or do they have the courage to ask?
Mm,
And like for instance, like how can we support you? Right kind of situation. That's a question.
mhm,
And then to accommodate as well, I would like to sit up closer or because I'm hard of hearing, or I want to sit close to the door because I'm slow at walking, whatever. I'm
mm.
using these as examples.
Yeah, yeah. I think an
Yeah.
example
So
of
it's having common courtesy. Practice that. What consider it.
that puts me in mind of another polarity is individual benefit and community benefit, where there's, like you say, somebody who has a disability. And how do we balance the needs of the community to move together in ministry and the needs of the individual that might need a accommodation in order to be with the group? Sometimes these things can be pitted against one another as opposites and enemies. But in reality, we actually need both. We need whatever ministry we're busy with to be of benefit to the community and of benefit to the individual, especially the individual with special needs. I think that this might get even clearer as we move along into the polarity map. So I'm going to take us right to the drawing that I'd like you all to kind of put together on your sheet of paper. What I'd love to have you do is divide your sheet of paper into 4 quadrants, like I've got here on this notepad. So you're going to have a north-south axis, and you're going to have an east-west axis. And once you've drawn those 2 axes on your page, you'll have 4 different sections on your note paper. At the top of the north-south axis, you'll have this box, and it's a smaller box than the quadrants, but it's just going to be a box that contains a title. And the title that it contains is the Greater Purpose Statement. Why don't you draw that into a box and leave a little space under that so you can write down a greater purpose, an example of a greater purpose statement. But the most important piece of this is the 4 quadrants. So just make sure you've got a nice north-south axis that bisects the paper lengthwise, and an east-west axis that bisects the paper widthwise. You'll see perhaps at the place where these 2 axes cross, there's a word there. You can just make it out. It's the word "and." It's the word that Julia introduced us to in the introduction, and it's the hero word for the polarity mapping exercise. Rather than the word "or," tradition or innovation, in-reach or outreach, being of benefit to individuals or being of benefit to the community, we're going to make this an "and" proposition like we've been talking here. We're going to try to do both values, whatever example of values that we've got going, both at the same time. So the "and" word is pretty significant. You've also got 1 or 2 more things to draw onto your diagram. 2 ovals on the east-west axis. And just draw them. They're going to be containers for some words as well. But just draw those 2 ovals as blanks for the moment. Anybody got an example? Be willing to lift up your page just to show the rest of us what it might look like in your version? Who's got one ready to go? Oh, it looks like, there we go. Nice. Yeah, excellent, excellent. Yeah, I can just barely see what you've got drawn there. Looks to me like you've got it going. That's terrific. So again, you've got 4 different quadrants, right? 4 quadrants on the same page. You've got the 2 ovals on the east-west axis on either side of the north-south axis. And at the top, you've got a greater purpose statement box with a blank for an example of a greater purpose statement. Everybody with me so far? Just give me a thumbs up. All right. I see a few kind of tepid thumbs up, like you think you're with me. That's all right. That's all right. Okay, let's see here. Let's fill out the greater purpose statement. So like I say, at the top of your diagram, where you've got these 4 quadrants, you've got that box with the greater purpose statement. You've left a little blank because we want to put in there now an example of a greater purpose statement. This is the thing we're all aiming for, whether we're bringing this value or that value to the conversation. No matter where we fall on the polarity map here, we're all aiming for this one thing. So here's my example to go with the polarity of thorough process and efficient deployment. The greater purpose statement that I'm going to propose just for the sake of our exercise, and you could probably come up with a better one than I can, but here's the one that I'd like to suggest. We want Nelson Avenue to be a place where everyone flourishes. That's the greater purpose. We want Nelson Avenue to be a place where everyone flourishes. That's what we're going to aim for with this polarity. So instead of assuming that only efficient deployment allows everybody to flourish, and instead of assuming that only thorough process allows everyone to flourish, we're going to make it so that both of these things are understood by the community as helping everyone to flourish. And that everyone will truly flourish when both of these values are honored and we're pursuing them both at the same time. Okay? So we want to have new people flourish by using their gifts and deploying them efficiently into ministry, so that there are not a lot of obstacles for those who walk in the door as guests and visitors and want to become members of the community. Not a lot of obstacles for them that are unnecessary for them to use their gifts and find their way to flourishing at Nelson Avenue. We want to make sure that that's happening. We also want the vulnerable to flourish by having safety measures in place for them, by having protocols and processes that protect them from whatever harm there might be if we didn't have those protocols in place. But the main goal for all of this is we want everybody to flourish, everyone. So that's our main purpose statement. That's our general purpose statement there at the top. Everybody with me so far? All right. Let's go to the bottom left quadrant. And what I want to do, first of all, before we talk too much about the bottom left quadrant here, is in that oval that's on the left side, I want to have you write one of the two values that we are going to balance together. And let's make that value on the left side of the page thorough process. So in that oval that you've drawn on your page, on the left side, the left oval, not the right one, but the left one, thorough process. And as you might imagine, on the right side of the page, there's another oval, and in that oval, you could put efficient deployment. These are the two things we're going to balance. We want to do the and with these two things: thorough process and efficient deployment. So when you've written those two things in those two ovals, that's the sentence you're going to be able to read across the middle of the page: thorough process and efficient deployment. Two values that we're trying to balance. All right. Now, what I'd like everybody to do is turn your camera back on so I can see your faces. Take yourselves off of mute for just a second, and we're going to populate together that bottom left quadrant. And what that means is we're going to talk and think together out loud about what happens when all you do is thorough process, lots of rules and regulations and processes and protocols. What are the downsides, not the benefits? We'll think about that later, okay? But we're just going to think for a moment now about the downsides that come when all we do is think about process and protocols and rules and regulations. Lots and lots of process. Think out loud with me. What are some of the downsides that we might encounter?
Intimidating.
Yeah, it might be kind of intimidating for people. I'd like to have you write that down in that quadrant, everybody, on your page. Just write that down. Intimidating for newcomers.
Yes.
It can take a long time.
What might be another? Joanne, did you say something about that?
Yeah. Sorry, it can take a long time.
It can be time consuming. Yep. Time consuming for the pathway from visitor to being used in ministry, being placed in ministry. Time consuming. What else might be a downside that you'd encounter if our focus is exclusively on making sure that there are rules and protocols in place?
It never launches.
Okay, ministries might be delayed or never launch. There's that possibility. And again, for anybody out there who are like really kind of fans of process, we're going to eventually get to the upsides of process. Don't worry, we'll get there. But right now, I just want to have us think about this bottom left-hand quadrant, the downsides of thorough process. And like somebody said a minute ago, might be delays in getting ministry started. It might even be hard to get ministries started where they don't actually get off the ground.
I'd like to add
How about,
it consumes resources.
Nick, what was that?
It consumes resources, meaning that if you spend time doing that and energy and money, then you're taking that away from something else potentially.
Okay.
Mhm, okay.
Resource consuming, not just time consuming, but resource consuming. Yeah.
Jen here, how about because the process is taking so long, you will lose people.
Ah, nice, Jen. Yep.
Yep.
There's the possibility of losing people. If the process takes too long, people might
Yeah.
get frustrated or impatient or what have you and say, I'm done, I'm out.
I would like to say there's raised up concerns, raising concerns, uncertainty.
Mm-hmm. Yep, there could be levels of uncertainty and ambiguity. If there's a lot of process, then people might get confused about what the next step is. What do I need to think about? What are the things that I need to make sure get done in order for me to make through to the next step in the process? So lots of work, lots of consuming kinds of work. If we focus exclusively on process, thorough process. You guys are doing great. You're doing wonderful here. What else might we add to this quadrant?
Can feel stifling.
It could feel stifling. Yeah.
Which is maybe what I would want to add, like just a tone, right? Like, and this can be for either side, but if you're just process, there's a certain tone that could develop in a community.
Okay. Yeah. Yo, could you say more about how we might describe that tone?
Well, I was wondering, yeah, what words you would use, but it might feel to some people, and maybe this has already been kind of mentioned, but it might feel like, well, you have to whatever, be here long enough and know enough, and it's not maybe easy community to become part of. Like it feels very insular.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Perception could be if you focus exclusively on rock solid process. And again, it's for the protection of the vulnerable in the community. But if you focus exclusively on that, there could be a tone that gets left in the minds of people that this is a hard community to be a part of. There's just lots of rules and regulations that we have to follow. Yep. So I've got a sentence here on my little master notes here that might resonate with this quadrant, the downsides of thorough process. The sentence that people might hear if a church is engaged in a lot of process and maybe too much process is, at times, I think our church is too focused on making sure that all the T's are crossed and all the I's are dotted. If you've heard a statement like that, it's worth paying attention. There might be some things that need to get done, and we'll talk more about how to pay attention and what to look for and how to respond to that later on. For now, we're going to just populate actually all four of these quadrants. So let's move to the next quadrant that we're going to work on, the top right-hand side of the quadrant. Top right-hand side of the page, I mean. And this side of the page is all about what, everybody?
Yes.
Well, what value in particular is this side of the page devoted to?
Deployment efficient.
Yes, efficient deployment. This is the efficient deployment side of the page. So let's say that you're a church that has a lot of rules and procedures, and people start to get kind of tired of all the rules and procedures. And let's forget about the rules and procedures, and let's just make sure that people have an efficient pathway into deployment. What are all the upsides that we'll encounter when we make it really easy for people to be streamlined into ministry? What are we going to encounter and experience as a church when we have a very efficient deployment system? We're bringing people in and we're sending them into ministry. Tell me all the good sides about that.
Things
I would
happen
like to.
fast.
Go ahead.
I would like to say remaining neutral. So when I say remaining neutral, I'm meaning like having an open mind,
Mm,
keeping it, yeah, instead of like trying to control. So
okay,
just having like, just being open-minded.
sure. Yeah,
Yes, that's
there's
all
a
I'll
sense
say.
of openness. Let's just call it a sense of
Yes,
openness. Let's call it that. Go ahead and write that down in the top right-hand quadrant on your page. And again, we're looking at the upsides now of the other value, efficient deployment. What are some of the other upsides, everybody, that you would expect to encounter when the church is focused exclusively on that? What are you going to sense? What are you going to hear? What are the upsides here?
I would say acceptance.
Acceptance, is that what you
Feeling,
said?
yes,
Yep.
feeling you or we are accepted into the group, into the community, that we are included, being part of the community.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, it becomes easier to sense that you're included, right? It's easier to sense that I have a role here. The word that we'll sometimes use is assimilation. It is easier to become assimilated into the community when there is a quick and easy process for me to go from being a first-time visitor to being employed or deployed, I should say, in ministry. Yeah, nice. What are some other upsides, everyone?
Can I add events happen fast and quickly?
Uh,
Jen here.
yeah. Yep. Programs move more quickly. Yep, you can add that. Write that into the top right-hand quadrant there. Programs get moving more quickly.
Feels like growth would happen fast.
Hmm?
More people coming in.
Yep. There's certainly greater possibility for that, right? There's a sense that if it's easy for people to find their way into this community, more people will do so. Potential for growth increases. Yeah, Joanne.
I would think a lot of excitement and energy would come from that.
Yeah, for sure. Lots of excitement, lots of energy, some new faces, always makes folks feel good. Yep. Just a real sense that, hey, when folks come along to our church, having a really quick process of putting them into ministry, helping them to feel included, a sense of joy and excitement. Absolutely. Yeah, what else would you want to put down there in the top left hand, or excuse me, top right hand quadrant? Let's have one more thing, and then we'll go to the next quadrant. Did we exhaust the list, everyone?
You get to know each other better because you're involved.
Ah, lovely.
yeah.
Yeah, increased involvement often means increased sense of being together.
Yep.
Nicely done. Very nicely done. All right. What do you think? Can we close this quadrant off for a moment? Go on to the next one? Let's do that. Let's go to the next quadrant, the bottom right-hand corner. So let's say that efficient deployment becomes a great success to the neglect of the other side of the polarity, the thorough process side. What downsides are there, everybody, when we focus exclusively on streamlining people to, coming into ministry, putting them in ministry? No rules, no process, just plop, put them in ministry. What are the downsides that a church might encounter if that's the case?
People are going to object to change.
What was that, Jan?
People are going to object to changes.
They might object to changes, perhaps. Okay. Yeah, what else is going to be a downside for efficient deployment?
Things get missed.
Yeah, Jen, what do you have in mind there about things that get missed?
because the focus is on getting things done quickly, then some of the important things might get missed and not done or
Yep.
just totally missed.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. Let's just spend some time on that one. What kinds of things might get missed, everybody? Let's fill that one in a minute.
I would like to say miscommunication.
Mm.
There's a communication gap.
Yeah, when you're rushing around getting people all into ministry and stuff, there's a high need for lots of communication and a high risk that there won't be enough and that there'll be communication gaps. Lots of misunderstanding, possibly. Yep.
I would say, yeah, could be a negative impact on the spiritual health of the community. We rush into perhaps put somebody into a role for which is not ready, and that could be a negative impact, perhaps for not being a good witness to other newcomers.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's exactly right. You could jeopardize the spiritual health of the community by putting people into positions that are not spiritually ready for them. And the offices of elder and deacon come most readily to mind, of course. But there might be other positions that require a certain level of spiritual maturity. And if you're putting people that you've not vetted, that you've not tested, that you've not had a conversation with, you've not interviewed, there can be some real danger that the people you put into those positions are not ready, spiritually speaking, and could have negative impact on the spiritual health of that ministry and maybe even on the spiritual health of the church. So that's a definite downside. I think you're absolutely right. If we have no policy, no rules, no procedures in place, that's something that we'll encounter. What else can you think of, everybody? What else might get missed? I like Jen's language. What else might get missed?
Safety.
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
Safety.
Safety. Hello. Yep. Especially of the vulnerable. There might be, if you just throw anybody into the mix for the sake of throwing people into the mix and including them, you might have folks who are not at all acquainted with the special needs of particular kinds of people who are part of the community of faith. So safety might get missed. That might be a downside. Yep. What else might you name as a downside of efficient deployment?
If there's not time to train people or have people have experience, they wouldn't be able to do things as well as we might want them to.
Yeah. Lack of training. Lack of training that might be pretty harmful to a particular ministry. Yeah, again, I'm thinking about this church in Chicago that I was busy with the last couple of days. And one of the pastor's complaints is that the elders and deacons are coming into office not well trained. We want to, as a church, it's felt that they want to kind of bring people into office and make use of their gifts. But there's not a thought given to orientation for elders and deacons. So they enter the offices without training and end up not doing very well over the course of their 3-year term. Not certain of what their job is, not certain of what their responsibilities are. Without that training, it's really tough for the church in the long term.
I'm glad you brought that up because I like to say there'll be a lot of people will be questioning, like, okay, who do I go to? Who's in charge of this and that? So it's a red flag right there. If you don't have the proper people in place that are delegating this, whatever they're assigned to be, it will bring a lot of questions up addressing it.
Yeah, there could be some serious confusion, right, Sandra? Yeah. Yeah, excellent. Anything else you want to add to this quadrant, everybody? Anything else that seems to fit into this quadrant? Downsides of thorough or efficient deployment.
Creates weak leadership and then feels very disorganized.
Yeah, some disorganization, weak leadership. You could write those into that quadrant as well. Yep. Nestor, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I would say a sense of improvisation. Maybe not planning enough or not following the process will take us into improvising, and so the community may not have a sense of they are being taken care of.
Yep. Yeah, improvisation. I mean, improvisation itself is not a bad thing, but if you find yourself improvising all the time because you've not done the work ahead of time to prepare the way, to follow the rules and procedures and so on, that gets wearying on a community. If you feel like we are improvising all the time, people get exhausted of improvisation if that occurs all the time. And if the improvisation is on the part of office bearers who are improvising ways to take care of their people, those people might not feel well cared for. You're kind of calling it in, you're making it up, you're working on the fly. It's good for an emergency measure, not good for standard practice. All right, test time, everybody. You ready for this? Here's the test. What is the one more quadrant that we have yet to fill? Which quadrant do we need to spend some time on yet?
The end.
Well, we're doing and all day long here, but there's one more quadrant that we need to spend some time on. What quadrant is that?
The upper
Positives of
left
thorough
hand.
process.
Yeah, the
Right.
upside.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Right. Forgot.
We got to think about the upsides now of thorough process. Let's say that as a congregation, you've dispensed with all the rules and regulations because you just want to throw people into ministry. And that goes well for a while, but then you start to experience the downsides that we've just talked about together, the confusion, the chaos, and so on. So then the church goes to the upper left in terms of this map here, okay? It goes to the ups, it goes to focus on thorough process again. So let's talk for a minute about what all the upsides are of thorough process. What is that church now going to encounter when it starts to emphasize again, let's do things decently and in good order? 1 Corinthians 14. What are the upsides there?
Efficiency.
Efficiency could be.
Better communication.
Better communication. Yeah, because you probably have some protocols related to who should say what to whom and when and how often. Yeah.
Having structure in place.
You've got some structure in place for folks to count on. Reliable. Yeah.
Better safety.
Better safety. Excellent.
It's more fair.
It's more fair. Yeah. When everybody has to abide by the same rules, there's no favoritism. It's more fair. Yeah. Nice, Jesse. What else would you want to put into that quadrant?
How you put support to the leadership. And what I mean is there is a group of hard workers that are planning, preparing all these processes, and they may feel that they are not supported when those processes are not being followed.
Right. Yeah, with great process and great policy and great structure, volunteers feel supported. I mean, generally speaking, feel like they've got a place to kind of rely on. If I've got a complaint or a need or whatever, I know where to go. There's structure for that. I know that my fellow volunteers have been through the same process of preparation and training, so I can count on them. There's reliability. And what else are some upsides of a focus on thorough process?
You've got more teamwork.
Generally speaking, more teamwork.
Accountability and trust.
Hello. Yeah. Colleen, nicely done. Accountability and trust. Yeah. Yeah. What else would you want to put into that top left-hand quadrant, everyone?
Better understanding of how to implement your resources.
Yeah. Yep. Better understanding for how to put resources to work. Whether those resources are people, money, tools, what have you. Yeah. You guys are good. This is going great. Well done, everyone. Let's just review for a second before we go on. Oh yeah, I'm getting ahead of myself. Hang on. Okay, we're still back here at the top left-hand quadrant. So let's say that you're a church that has made its way back to the top left and you're refocused on thorough process. You know what's next, right? You focus overly too much on thorough process, you find yourself back here again with the downsides of thorough process. If you're focused exclusively on that and you've set aside for the time being, efficient deployment, you're back at the downsides of thorough process. It becomes kind of a crazy cycle, and that's why you see the arrows on the map that I have here for you. You see the arrows going from one quadrant to the next quadrant to the next quadrant to the next quadrant, unless there's a way to balance them. And we're going to talk about that next. How do you balance these things? Before we do, though, I just want to hear from you what you have in your quadrants. Let's just review that together for a minute. Somebody, would you please read us what you've got for that bottom left-hand quadrant? What's all the stuff that you've got listed there in the bottom left-hand quadrant? Anybody volunteer for that?
I can. I've got intimidating, time consuming, delay or never launch, resource consumption, possibility of losing people, uncertainty, and stifling.
Thank you, Jan. Very, very nice. Let's go to the next quadrant, the top right-hand quadrant. This is the quadrant in which we talk about the upsides of efficient deployment. Who'd be willing to read us through the list that we have there?
The upper left, you said?
Yeah, top right.
Okay.
Top right, Sandra, the top right one.
Yes, okay. Yes. So I have the individual benefits, the openness, programs. That's what I have. And so that's what I got down.
Okay. Thanks, Sandra. Anything else, everybody, that you might have in that top right-hand quadrant? I think we had a few items there.
Assimilation.
Assimilation of members, yep, of people, of guests and visitors, yep.
Programs move more quickly.
Yep, all that. Yay. Well done.
Potential for growth.
Excuse me. Yes. Right.
Excitement,
Energy.
Lots of energy. Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. Perfect.
Increased involvement in being together.
Yeah. Awesome. Let's go to the next quadrant, the bottom right. This is the downsides now of efficient deployment. What are the downsides there? Somebody read me the list.
Things will get missed. There can be miscommunication, a lack of preparedness. It can jeopardize spiritual wellness. Things can become unsafe. There can be a lack of training. There can be confusion, disorganization, weak leadership, and I guess too much making things up on the fly, improvisation.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. Thanks, Jesse. Nice. Let's go to that final quadrant, the top left-hand quadrant on the map here. This is, again, the top left-hand quadrant, all the upsides related to thorough process. What did we list out there, everybody? Somebody read the list for us.
It was started with 1 Corinthians 14, do things in good order. So it's biblical, you could say.
Okay.
Better communication, structure that's reliable, safety, more fair, no favoritism, volunteers feel supported, generally more comfortable, accountability and trust, understanding of how to put resources to work.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, well done. Yeah, thanks everybody. That's terrific. All right, I'm going to skip this part. For folks who do this a lot, they talk about the deeper fear, and the deeper fear is the opposite of the general purpose statement that you've got at the top, or the general's what do we call it again? The statement. Somebody remind me, what's that top one? General purpose statement, something along that line?
Greater purpose statement.
Greater, thank you. I knew it started with a G. Greater purpose statement. So the deeper fear is the opposite of that. I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on that at all. What I'd rather have us think about is which two of the four quadrants would you rather live in?
The top ones.
Yeah,
the top two.
Obviously the top two, exactly. You'd rather experience all of these wonderful upsides of the two ends of the polarity, all the wonderful upsides that come with thorough process, and all the wonderful upsides that come with efficient deployment. And what that means is you'd rather not live in the lower half of the page, the two downside quadrants, the downsides of thorough process and the downsides of efficient deployment. So what has to happen in the map here is that when you as a leadership body have understood and recognized that this is the polarity that we're working with, whether it's tradition and innovation, or in-reach and outreach, or thorough process and efficient deployment, together you're going to want to do exactly what we've just done. You're going to want to populate all four of these quadrants. The next thing that you want to do is commit to one another that you're going to keep a sharp eye out for all the things that are found on the bottom half of the page. You're going to keep a sharp eye out individually and as a group for when these things start to predominate, when they start to show up frequently, when you start to experience these things a lot. And as you start to experience, let's say, a lot of the downsides, particularly of one half, let's say it's a thorough process, you'll have a conversation at that point about how do we regain the balance here? How do we make our way to greater thriving for everybody at Nelson Avenue, which is our greater purpose statement? What are some of the things that we need to stop doing or to do less of, and the things we need to start doing more of? That's the kind of conversation that you're going to want to have. So let's take an example, not the one we're working with here, but one of the ones from the church in Chicago, in-reach and outreach. Let's say that in that congregation, the polarity is unbalanced in terms of outreach. They're focusing exclusively on outreach. And what's happening is that the downsides of outreach, they're starting to experience member discontent, or members that aren't being well cared for. They're starting to experience a sense that programs are being overwhelmed because there are so many people coming in because of the outreach programs. At that point, the elders and deacons, recognizing that, are going to say, maybe we need to focus more for the next 6 months of our life together, or the next year, on strengthening those who are inside the body, strengthening our leadership, strengthening the programs that our people are a part of, so that we've got ways to take care of all those who are coming in from the outside. Let's find ways to do a little bit less outreach for the time being, so that we can experience the upsides of in-reach and the upsides of outreach all at the same time. In the case of the polarity we're working with today, that you and I are working with, thorough process, efficient deployment, if we start to experience the downsides of efficient deployment, we know that we need to start spending more time and energy and focus on thorough process, and vice versa. That work is not a one day and done kind of work, everybody. That work is a management process over the lifetime of the church. And it's part of what the leadership is called to, as it's trying to help the church into that greater purpose of thriving for everybody. Thriving for everybody. If we want to live in the upsides, let's keep an eye out for what's in the downsides. And when we notice that we're experiencing a lot of downsides on this side of the map, well, we know that we've got to start paying more attention to the other side of the map. And if we start noticing a lot of downsides here on the left side of the map, maybe we need to start doing more work and energy spent on the right side of this map. You might be realizing by now that this is not rocket science. This is actually a simple management tool for aiming for the greater flourishing of everybody at Nelson Avenue. This is a way to balance these two things, to do the and kind of life rather than the or kind of life. And again, when I was visiting with folks at Nelson Avenue back in the springtime, early summer, I was hearing people really focused on one or the other. And it turns out that both of these things are beautiful and helpful for the greater thriving of everybody at Nelson Avenue. And what we've given you here is a little tool to help you recognize or to find a way to recognize and address what happens when you experience the downsides of either side of that polarity. Let's see here. I want to make sure I've got everything here for you that I wanted to deliver here tonight before we have kind of a Q&A time. Okay, let's do this. Let's see everybody's maps. Just show them off. Go ahead, show them off, everybody.
There you go.
Let's see them.
Just
Nice. Yeah, right on. Excellent. Well done. Well done, everyone. So this is an exercise that you can do with any polarity that you recognize. And it's not as if there's, like a set list out there someplace in the mysterious far and away, a set list of all the polarities that you might encounter. You might simply intuit that there are these two values that we seem to be at war with one another over. And instead of seeing them as enemies, let's go through this polarity mapping exercise and figure out a way to do the and, to live the with, as Pastor Yo was talking about earlier. Because we want everybody at everybody at Nelson Avenue to thrive. And that means doing both thorough process and efficient deployment, and keeping a sharp eye out for those downsides so that when we see them, we know that we need to start focusing on the other side of the map and putting some things into place for that part of the map to thrive. Let me stop there, and I'm going to just first ask Julia if you sense that there's anything that I've missed along the way here, and then we'll open it up for some Q&A.
No, I don't think so. I think you covered it up.
Okay, terrific. Thanks, Julia. So, hey, gang, tell me what you're thinking. Is there anything that's confusing you yet? Do you sense that you would indeed be able to take this into, let's say, a council meeting, let's say next year? Let's say that you've encountered a polarity that you want to draw everybody's attention to, and you're going to say to the person forming the agenda, hey, I think we've got two values that are in competition, and I think we need to do the polarity mapping exercise. How comfortable would you be in helping putting that into place? See a couple of thumbs up. That's good. Yeah.
Guess you need to have cooperation, or you need to have everybody on the same page as far as doing the exercise or taking the time to do it.
Yeah. I've seen it done before, Jan, with a large group of people And there were in the room, a large room, 4 tables. And at each table was this sheet that you've just drawn out with the 4 quadrants. Um, and everybody was asked to sit at a table and do this exercise together. And then they compared notes. And it was a way to deepen the community sense for how do we live these 2 values well. I forget what the 2 values were, but it was a kind of a large version of what you and I did here together tonight. You'll have the slide deck that Julia and I have shared with you tonight. You'll have this video recording as well. I'll send that to Pastor Yo and to Nick. But hey, let's just tell me what you're thinking, gang. We got about 15 minutes before we need to wrap up, so we've got some time for Q&A.
Well, if I may, when I'm listening to this, to me, this is kind of a similar model I would be recognizing is micro and macro. So micro is you start on the inside circle, right? And I know micro can mean a lot of things, but when I think of micro, I'm thinking starting small before you can actually expand outwards. So cleaning house first is micro. That's what I would see it as. And in order to have a clean slate, you need to do that first before you can actually go out there and become macro.
Okay.
That's kind of what I'm getting out of this from your teaching here. So
Sure.
I'm thinking from a different perspective because I was a support worker, and that's how I absorb it as.
Sure, thanks, Sandra. The polarity that makes me think about is attention to detail and attention to the large picture. I think about that as a really helpful polarity for some churches. Jesse, you've got your the hand up.
Yeah, I guess I just have questions about the word "and." It's like recognizing these 2 things as opposite. How then do we get them to work together? Is it just a sense of trying to find the right balance between the 2, or is it finding a way of, I don't know, having a thorough process that is also efficient or something like that? Maybe if you can speak more towards how to actually get the "and."
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's not as if we want to eliminate the uniqueness of either side of the polarity. We want to hold the uniqueness of each of those 2 values. In this case, thorough process and efficient deployment. And I don't think it's going to be possible to find one single process that does both of them, but it is going to be possible to find 2 different processes that help to express both of these 2 values. And from time to time, make use of one process if that's what you need to rebalance the polarity, or the other process if that is what you need to balance the polarity. Does that help, Jesse? Or does that make you more confused?
I think that helps. So thank you.
Okay. Yeah, you're welcome.
I have a question.
Yeah, Grace.
Maybe it's pretty simple, but when you talk about keeping a sharp eye out for the downsides, is that the leadership? Is that the congregation? And how would that be? I mean, maybe this is becoming process. I don't know, but I wonder how that would actually be facilitated.
Yeah, what a great question, Grace. Thank you for that. I'm imagining that one of the ways that might occur is if you as a council start to hear a similar complaint multiple times, and that complaint might be associated with, hey, we sure do a lot of T crossing and I dotting here. Do we ever get anything done? That if you hear that complaint frequently, you know, because that's one of the downsides of thorough process, you know that you need to do some thinking about rebalancing this polarity. If, on the other hand, you hear a lot of people saying, boy, there's just some folks getting hurt here because we don't have really good processes for vetting our volunteers. We don't have good processes for communication between, the different ministries. You know that there's not then, you can kind of sense if you hear this often enough, there's not enough process in place. And maybe we need to start creating a couple of processes to address these things. the benefit to this polarity mapping thing, and again, it's not real rocket science, but the benefit here is that it makes you intentional about identifying the downsides and then gives you a sense for the next step. The next step then is to think about what is the other side of the polarity that we need to focus more attention on. Does that make sense, Grace? Does that help you? Okay. Other thoughts?
I think we just need to sometimes talk with a little bit more grace and use language that is appropriate.
Well, that's your use of the word grace puts me in mind of that greatest of all polarities, grace and truth.
Mm-hmm.
What if only one side is willing to be involved in the polarity issue and the other side's not wanting to engage?
Yeah, that's a leadership challenge then for the council. Hopefully the council is able to sense that there are in fact these two sides. And if leadership senses, if the council senses that any given group in the church is kind of fixated on this value to the exclusion of the other value, one of their roles is going to be just to have some conversation with that group to say, we want to balance these two things together. We think that these two things need one another in order for them to become truly beautiful. And our hope is that you'd come with us in that. That's a leadership kind of a conversation. All right. Well, I mean, that's all that I have for you tonight, everyone. And I just want to make sure, Yo and Nick, anything that you want to add to the conversation for a second here before we wrap up in some prayer? Putting you guys on the spot.
Yeah, that was really, really helpful, Dave and Julia. Thank you so much. As you started talking, or about an hour ago, I guess I was thinking, well, one of these has to lead the church. But I've kind of changed my mind in the last hour or so. And it seems to me that you're always back and forth.
Yeah.
That's what the sense I'm getting, right?
Yeah.
You can't have just one lead the church. You have to go always back and forth and discerning as a leadership team, the council, or just like where are we unbalanced now? Where we have to, yeah. So thanks for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. That's a great observation. This is an ongoing work, right? This is an ongoing work. And it might even be that from time to time, if you as a council have sensed that this really is a polarity we want to balance well, that every fourth month or fifth month or what have you, you might just ask the question, are we doing a good job of balancing here? What are you hearing from your people? What are you hearing a lot of from your people? Do we have a sense that we're overly weighted on one side of the polarity or the other? That might be just a good conversation to visit from time to time. Make sure you're balancing the polarity well.
I think for me, when you do a polarity exercise like this, it kind of has the potential of taking some of the stress out of it and just helps people the participants maybe to have a more open view at a higher level. And no, I think the greater purpose statement is really good. Like, that's a place to really be looking. Why are we doing this? Why do we have safe church? You might get a different answer from different people. One person might say, you want it to ensure safety. And another person might say, well, I want to feel safe. They're quite different things. And the second one has elements of integrity as well and consistency that they're looking for.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest challenge here is what we talked about right at the end is, when the church leadership sees some problems or complaints or repetition of downsides, not to leave it too long, to start these kind of cooperative conversations early.
Yep.
And try and keep people together on the higher purpose, I suppose.
Yeah. Yep, exactly. Yeah, this does become really helpful for ironing out differences. There's a church that we're aware of. We did a polarity mapping exercise with them a few years ago. Two pastors. One pastor came in. He kind of represented for the congregation, new and innovative. The pastor had been there for a while, represented like the traditions, the rootedness, the groundedness of the congregation. And over time, what began to happen was that people would migrate to one pastor or the other. And the dynamic that began to develop was an animosity between these two pastors, sort of a war for who had the most support. When the council reached out to us to help them understand what was going on and to try to resolve this war that had developed, we began to sense that there's actually a polarity at work here. The tradition and innovation polarity is the one that we identified as most key. And when we helped the council to understand that polarity and that the two pastors had become representatives of each of the two poles, we could then help them understand that you can actually do both, keeping in a sharp eye out, as we said, for the downsides of either one, tradition and innovation. Excuse me, and there are some serious downsides to doing tradition exclusively and downsides to doing innovation exclusively. Let's keep an eye out for those things and live into the upper half of this the polarity map that they drew as part of their polarity. And what ended up happening is that they balanced these two things better, and the two pastors began to be understood not as representatives of two warring factions, but as representatives of two values that we could balance together. They began to catch that vision as well and began to use that kind of language in the congregation. I'm not sure if that solved all of their stuff, but it solved a bit of their stuff, enough that they could get along into other good work together. All right, everybody. Hey, this has been great. It's been good to see you again. And I hope it's helpful. As I said, I'll send the link to the video to Nick, so he can distribute that to all of you, as well as the slide deck that we prepared for tonight. Yeah. Julia, would you be willing to lead us in a closing prayer?
Yes, let's pray. Lord God, we're grateful for the opportunity that we have had to come together this evening. We have explored a topic that can be really challenging, and we know that working together, even as brothers and sisters in Christ, when there's tension, the difficult situation that we find ourselves in. Lord, we pray that as we reflect on this exercise tonight and as the council of Nelson Avenue moves forward, that this would be a useful tool to them, and would be something that they could utilize in the future for the flourishing and thriving of your kingdom. Lord, we pray that you would be with us as we go on our ways this evening, for safety for all. And again, we thank you for being with us in this time. In your name, amen.
Amen.
Maybe I could take a moment